Hello, I'm Jacqueline, and I'm a normal girl with a teeny tiny difference. I'm a professional bodybuilder. Yes, I am that girl who enjoys going to the gym all day to build up muscles and get toned. While it all started as regular gym training, the day I started noticing some actual abs on my stomach, I got excited, and I knew right then that I wanted more muscle on my body. Training to be a bodybuilder was a big decision because I knew that it would affect the way people see me, especially because I was sure guys wouldn't find me as attractive anymore. Surprisingly, a lot of guys were actually interested in me. They were mostly guys I knew from the gym. Combine that with all the time I spent in the gym, I met most of the guys I dated there. Since then, every guy I dated was tall and masculine. These guys mainly wanted to date me because we shared the same passion for fitness. But the thing is, that passion was usually the only thing I had in common with them. I ended up getting bored quickly from talking about the gym 24/7. It felt like the guys had no substance. So, most of these relationships ended pretty quickly. My dating life was repeating itself for a long time, until I started going out with my current boyfriend, George. George was way different from all these gym guys. In fact, George was a nerdy, skinny guy who has zero masculine features. And somehow, we found ourselves drawn to each other after years of friendship. He was kind and sweet. After a while, without even meaning to, I developed romantic feelings for him and decided to be brave and ask him out on a date. I was surprised, yet very happy when he agreed. Since then, we started going out, and it was going really well between us. Our dates were so much fun. George had a great sense of humor, and his jokes always cracked me up. He simply knew how to keep me entertained. Until one day, I was with my girlfriends, and they decided to tell me what they really thought of George. They said that he was very girly and weak, and that everyone was making fun of me for being with him. To be honest, they kind of got in my head. Then I started to notice a bunch of things about George that were really annoying, and I started to feel like they were right. George was so submissive. It was like he had no backbone at all. He always agreed with everything I said and never seemed to have his own opinion on anything. When I was mad at him, he simply apologized and didn't argue. And he was scared of everything. Stupid things, like dogs and butterflies. It was so bad that whenever we went to see a horror movie, he would hold my hand and scream and cry the whole time. It was so unbearable. I told him over and over again that he should toughen up, which he always replied to with, "Okay, boss," which made me feel even angrier. I tried to overlook it until one day something happened that made me feel like I couldn't bear it anymore. On that day, George and I were walking down the street after school, and some kids started picking on us. They were making fun of George and I for being a weird couple and started calling us names like the chicken and gorilla. Then they started asking George questions like, "What does it feel like to kiss a gorilla twice your size?" Even though we decided to ignore them, hearing these words made me feel very angry, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. I looked at George, and he looked clueless. I whispered to him, asking if he was just going to let them talk about me like that. But George didn't have the guts to say anything, and he just stayed quiet. Unlike him, I couldn't hold it in anymore. So I stopped and turned back to them and said, "What did you say now?" with an angry, loud voice. As I was walking towards them, they started screaming and running away. They were scared because they obviously knew how strong I was and that I could kick their butts. George just laughed and said, "Good job, Jackie. You sure made them scared, boss." But I didn't smile back at him. I was so pissed because it was not my job to scare them off. It was his. He was the one who was supposed to make me feel protected and safe, and he was far from doing that. I looked at George and said that I didn't want to be with him anymore. I said, "We are over," and turned to walk home. George called out my name, but I didn't even respond. He made me feel so embarrassed. After a couple of days, I told my girlfriends that I finally broke up with George, and they were thrilled. They cheered me and said that I needed to be with someone who is strong and fearless, but I wasn't exactly feeling it. However, when it was their turn to talk about their boyfriend problems, all I heard was how their relationships sucked. One of them was angry at her boyfriend because he doesn't help her when she asks him to. And another girl was upset that her boyfriend never asks her for permission when he should. I didn't even understand how they allowed their boyfriends to control them like that. As I sat there listening, I started to understand how things would be if George was like typical boyfriends. And to be honest, I wasn't going to settle for that in any way. I couldn't deny that I actually enjoyed being in charge. After all, being in control really did suit me. I am an alpha girl. I was meant to be a leader, and George happily embraced that part of me. I got to be the one who wore the pants. Seriously, how could I ask for a better relationship? With these thoughts running through my head, I excused myself and immediately went to see George. Days had passed since I last spoke to him, and I kind of felt bad about it. He kept texting me and tried calling me. I never replied to anything. So on my way, I texted him that I was coming over. When I arrived, I saw George on the other side of the street, waiting for me. When he saw me, his face lit up, and he immediately gave me a big hug and said that he missed me. Right after, he started apologizing for what happened and said that he should have been more tough. I told him we were okay and that he doesn't need to apologize for anything, because the truth is, I like him just the way he is. And if I were really being honest, I was happy to be the boss, and I like feeling powerful. George looked so relieved to hear me say that and gave me a big hug and whispered in my ear, "That would be just perfect." I whispered back, "Tell me that I'm the boss one more time." George laughed and said, "Of course, baby, you're the boss," and he kissed me. While some people might still think that we have a weird relationship, George and I are perfectly happy this way, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
My name is Lily, and this is how I learned that being poor is actually not as bad as I thought it was. My family have never had a lot of money, and when my dad left, it meant that my mom had to support me and my twin brothers herself. She works in a factory, so it's been pretty difficult to make ends meet, and I spend a lot of time looking after my brothers when my mom is working late. Even though we don't have a lot of money, I couldn't ask for a better mom. She would do anything for us. She always plays games with us, bakes us cakes, and tucks us in at night. A lot of my friends' parents buy them loads of expensive things, but then never spend any time with them. So I'm glad my mom treats us like we're the most important things in the world. I was quite clever, so I got a scholarship to go to an expensive high school for free. I loved it there, apart from the fact that everybody came from really rich families. They all had the latest phone, designer clothes, and had second houses abroad. But luckily, as we had to wear a uniform, no one realized that I usually just wore my mom's old clothes, or that we didn't have a car, or couldn't always afford to pay for heating. Whenever anyone asks for my number, I just said, "Oh, sorry, I'm currently doing a digital detox." And they would smile and be like, "Oh yeah, that's totally trendy right now." I felt bad lying, but it was better than them knowing the truth, that I was just poor. I quickly made a best friend, Sasha, and I went over to her house a few times. It was huge, with a big garden and an indoor pool. We would go horse riding, or try on her mom's pretty dresses, or be taken out for dinner by her parents. Sasha kept asking me if she could come round to my house. I tried to put her off, saying that my brothers were too naughty or that my mom was away. I was worried that she would see the overgrown garden, peeling wallpaper, and creaky floorboards and run a mile. But eventually, I realized that if I didn't invite her over, she might give up on being my friend, so I finally agreed. As we walked to my house, I was so nervous about what Sasha would say when she realized that I was poor. Would she laugh? Would she leave in disgust? Would she say something that would make my mom feel embarrassed for our simple life? As we walked towards our neighborhood and the houses got smaller and smaller, I kept expecting her to make a comment on how different this was to her neighborhood. But she didn't. When we stopped outside my house, she looked taken aback. "You live here?" she asked. I looked down at my feet, my face beginning to blush. At that exact moment, Sasha's phone rang, and she walked away to take the call. I knew it. She was disgusted by my house and was going to find an excuse to get back to her fancy neighborhood as quickly as possible. I should never have brought her here. What if she tells everyone where I live? She probably texted her mom as soon as we got to my street, and now her mom is coming to get her. I felt tears pricking the back of my eyes. But I didn't want Sasha to see me cry. As I started rubbing them to make them stop, she walked back towards me and said, "This is amazing." I was taken aback, thinking she was joking. "This garden is so cool. My parents would never let us have so many wildflowers. They insist that we keep it pristine and boring. I love the color of the wallpaper. This house has so much character." I looked at her in shock. Was she being serious? My mom had cooked us pasta for dinner, and I was worried what Sasha would think of it. She didn't eat much, and I knew it was because she probably thought it was plain and tasteless. We didn't even have any dessert to offer her. But then my mom suggested we play some board games together. Sasha was probably thinking how boring my family was by that point. So I said no thanks to my mom, and we went up to my room. As soon as we closed the door and sat on my bed, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told Sasha I was going to the toilet and would be back in a minute. I went to the kitchen to talk to my mom. I don't know why, but I started yelling at my mom for being poor. I told her that it's because of her that I'm so shy at school, and that if anyone knew the truth about how poor we are, they wouldn't want to be my friend. And now I need to apologize to Sasha for the house and the pasta. My mom looked so confused, and she had tears in her eyes. At that moment, Sasha came up behind me and she shouted at me, "Don't you understand? You have a wonderful mom and family, but you don't appreciate it. You shouldn't talk like that to your mom. And Lily, I don't care how much money you have. Anyone who cares about that isn't worth your time. I've had a better time here than I ever have at my house, because although you might think your family is poor, you're rich in so many other ways. And that is worth more than anything. I mean, your mom actually wants to hang out with you, and she is so sweet. And about the pasta, I'm actually gluten intolerant." And then she laughed, and I found myself laughing too. I asked my mom for forgiveness for what I just said, and I gave her the biggest hug. Then I turned to Sasha, hugged her too, and said, "So, how about we all play a board game or two?"
Hi, my name is Carla. I'm 17 years old, and after my parents passed, I lived with my older sister Stacy and her husband. My parents passed 2 years ago. They died in a terrible car crash on their way back from a business trip in a neighboring town. They co-owned a big corporate business they ran together, and they had really gone on to make names for themselves. I was devastated when I heard the news. My relationship with my parents wasn't like most teenagers. Other teenagers fought and squabbled with their parents at every opportunity. Me? I had a different life. Both my parents were two of my best, if not my best friends. We went out to the movies and to restaurants together. We played and had fun like a regular bunch of teenage friends. Of course, they were stern when they needed to be, but every time they were, I knew that I was in the wrong. So, you can imagine how devastating it was to hear the news on television one night that the two business moguls, who were my parents, had died in a terrible car accident on their way back from a business trip. My best friends were gone. My sister Stacy already moved out of the house a long time ago. It had just been my parents and I for so many years. And It was so amazing how they had managed to take time out for me, even though they were so busy. The news hit me so hard, I sank into depression. The lively, happy Carla that everyone knew had disappeared. In her place was only someone who looked like her. As time went on, I grew worse and worse. I started to withdraw completely from my friends, and I refused to speak to anyone. I came to school in the mornings with swollen eyes, swollen from crying all night and hardly getting any sleep. My sister was crushed. She loved my parents too, but she knew she didn't have the type of relationship with them that I had, and seeing me so sullen filled her heart with pain. She had tried all she could, but nothing was working. She had brought counselors, therapists, and even psychics to help me with my grief, but there was nothing they could do. I just couldn't get better. As the months passed, I sank deeper and deeper into my depression. I was now so alone. I turned to destructive habits for company. It all started with buying drugs from a man who sold them on the corner of the street where I lived with my sister. When I realized they had a way of getting me happy, even for a short time, I couldn't stop. I kept buying them until I became such a wreck. Soon enough, I started on alcohol and smoking, looking for anything at all that could get me as happy as the drugs did. By now, I was so invested in it, I couldn't stop. This continued for a while, and by now, everyone in school knew the kind of life I lived. I came to school every day either drunk or under the influence of some drug, and by now, that was what everyone had come to expect of me. My sister was embarrassed every time the school authorities called her to come pick me up after making a scene, and that happened almost every day. I was worse than a shadow of myself, and deep down, I knew I had let this depression go too far, but I just couldn't bring myself to stop. I couldn't find my way back. I was too far gone. One day, I went back home to my sister's house early from school after the principal annoyed me. He had called me into his office, giving me a last warning after I slammed a basketball in my gym teacher's face for correcting me, leaving his face seriously swollen. "If you throw another fit at the teachers or anyone else, you will be expelled," he said. "We've accommodated this nonsense long enough. You're not the first person to lose their parents. Get a grip on yourself." I was filled with rage. And maybe it was because, deep down, I knew that what the principal said was true. Maybe it was because, deep down, the truth he had blurted out so bluntly had stung me. I stormed out of the principal's office and slammed the door so hard I distracted the whole school from learning for a moment. "You can send me out of your stupid school for all I care," I said, well out of hearing distance. I didn't really want to be expelled. It would break Stacy's heart. And I knew it wouldn't have been what my parents wanted. I marched home and pulled a cigarette stick from my backpack as I left the school premises. Those idiots! Who needs them anyway? I marched on until I reached my sister's house, but I totally wasn't ready for what I saw next. My sister's husband was home. He obviously wasn't expecting me back home that early, but it was just noon. I froze in my steps as I saw him. My brother-in-law was nearly butt naked on the couch, and scattered all around him were empty containers of used drugs. Used needles littered the floor and the center table, and I couldn't believe my eyes at what I saw. My sister's husband used drugs too? When did he start? That explained why he rarely said anything every time Stacy tried to correct me. He would look at me, but not say anything. At first, I thought he was just staying out of what he considered not to be his business. I couldn't think straight after realizing this. Eventually, I got myself together and walked away to my room, looking away from him. All kinds of thoughts flooded my head all at once. Was I going to tell Stacy what I just saw? What if she left him? What if he was only battling with something terrible like I was, and the drugs were his only way of escape? No, I'm not going to be sympathetic. This could come back and haunt me and my sister later. It was decided. I couldn't wait for Stacy to get back from work. I had to tell her. As I was upstairs in my room waiting for her, her husband came knocking on my door. My heart pounded. "Go away," I said. "I don't want to see you." "I can explain," he said. "Please, don't tell Stacy." I used to be unable to quit drugs before I met your sister, and when she found out, she said she couldn't be with me if I didn't stop. I pleaded with her to stay, that I would try my best because I really loved her, and eventually she helped me through rehab. I was free until you came along with your drugs, alcohol, and smoking. Then all of a sudden, I found myself craving to use drugs again. I battled it for so long, but 3 days ago, I couldn't take it anymore. Please don't tell Stacy. This could be our little secret. See, I brought some new drugs for you to try out. Come on, you'll love it. Now I was offended. There I was trying to get free, and Stacy's husband was trying to take me deeper in. Any thoughts of covering up for him immediately disappeared. When Stacy got back, I told her what I had seen. I told her I had seen her husband nearly butt naked, surrounded by empty containers of drugs and used needles. I told her that her husband had been using drugs. Stacy shot one look at her husband, begging him to deny it, and when he didn't, she exploded in a rage. Stacy was so mad and upset. I had never seen her like that before. She was screaming, crying, and yelling so hard. I knew by then neighbors already heard and knew what was going on. I walked up to her and tried to hug her to calm her down. "I'm sorry," her husband said, begging and crying on his knees. My sister wasn't having it. "Leave my house," she said. By now, tears were already forming in my own eyes. I knew the right thing to do was to tell my sister, but I didn't want her to lose her marriage. What if I had caught him cheating or doing something much worse? What would she do then? Right there, I knew that I could never tell my sister that he had offered me some of his drugs to bribe me. She would never forgive him. I started to feel very guilty for what I had done. I only imagined that my sister would make him go seek help or something, not send him away completely. It probably hurt her more because she thought he was already done with drugs for good. But still, a pang of guilt flowed over me, especially because he said I had been the trigger that took him back. I didn't know what came over me. Suddenly, I started to beg my sister with tears in my eyes to give him another chance. Somehow, all of this made me realize how much pain I had caused all the other people in my life in the last 2 years. My friends, my sister, and now her husband. I was secretly begging for another chance for myself, to make things right, to try to repair all the damage I had done to everyone around me. Stacy looked at me beg so passionately, and compassion filled her eyes. She told her husband to leave, but that he could come back once he had sought help. I sighed deeply and hugged her, tears flowing down my face. This was a second chance for me too, and we would have to have our secret after all. Stacy must never find out that her husband offered me drugs, or else their marriage would be over. A few months have passed, and now I'm back to being the old Carla again. Stacy's husband too is doing great, and he's almost ready to be back at the house. Pretty soon, we'll be one big happy family.